Here is a list of stats. How many of these can you actually name? I'll be honest, I couldn't name most of these until I did the research for this video. You see, the numbers tell a different story, and I'm going to help you learn how to read that story by breaking down 70 plus stats in 13 minutes. And at the end of the video, I have a stat that's been named after a player and a team, and I'm willing to share that with you because my name is Rotiluvshoops, I love basketball, I love to talk basketball, and I hope one day you can share that same love for basketball as I. Okay, the numbers. I know I said I'll explain all the stats, but I'll be honest, there's a few that I just don't need to break down for you. If you know the normal counting stats, then you can skip to the advanced stats. But for those of you that don't know, in order to find out basic scoring, you use points. Points needs no further explanation. LeBron leads this stat all time. For the next stats that I mentioned, they have 3 variations: the makes, the attempts, and the percentages. In order to work out the percentages, you do the makes over the attempts and you times it by 100. So that being said, we got field goals. This is the number of shots taken, excluding shots that were taken when fouled, and free throws. Then we have the 3-point field goals. This doesn't need to be explained because, as you know, this is the Steph Curry stat. Free throws. Free throws are shots that are awarded after a foul. In order to work out simple playmaking, you have assists. The number of times a player passed a ball to a player that then scores. John Stockton is the all-time leader in this stat with 15,806 assists. Crazy. These stats alone explain why you need advanced stats. This stat is extremely reductionist because, as you know, 10 assists from Tyrese Haliburton look extremely different to 10 assists from Nikola Jokic. Just because you have 10 assists doesn't mean that you're an elite playmaker. And then you have the assist to turnover ratio. This is a great stat when you're looking at a player's assist efficiency. Moving on, we have the Dennis Rodman stat, even though he isn't the all-time leader. Rebounds. Wilt Chamberlain is the all-time leader at catching the ball when people missed, and that's simply because people in the 60s, they couldn't score. And then you have offensive rebounds, which is catching a missed shot when you're on offense. Then you have defensive rebounds, catching a missed shot when you're on defense. Anyway, as I was saying, I thought I'd just sprinkle some knowledge in there. So a lot of people like to regard Dennis Rodman as the rebounding GOAT, but he actually finishes 23rd on the all-time rebounding list. Check your stats. We're done with the 90s. Now we have a few simple defensive stats. Blocks, making contact with the ball after a player shoots and stopping them from scoring. Steals, how many times can you take the ball away from the opponent? Personal fouls, what happens when you play defense like a player in the 80s? Next, we have the hustle stats, or what I like to call the Miami Heat stats. Now, I don't need to go into full explanation of what they are, but did you know that the Miami Heat players get bonuses on their checks every time they get deflections, loose balls recovered, and charges taken? Not screen assists though, this is just another hustle stat that has been added to the list, and the only other thing that Rudy Gobert is good at other than blocking shots. If you wanted to measure impact, simply you'd look at plus minus. This looks at a player's points differential from when they are on the court. If you wanted to look at ball control, then you just look at turnovers. Then there's participation stats, minutes played, games played. I don't need to break these down. Eventually you get onto the situational stats, which are transition points, aka fast break points. And then you have points in the paint, the Shaq and Giannis stat. Second chance points, which are points off an offensive rebound. Bench points, aka the Lou Will stat. And then you have fouls drawn, the James Harden, now Joel Embiid stat. Clutch points, which are all the points that are scored in the last 3 minutes. And you can also say clutch percentage, but I told you how you work out percentage. We don't need to go into that. It's important to mention that all of these stats can be adjusted to per game stats. This is where you take the total and you divide it by the amount of games played. Now, if that is the case, then you get the PG involved somewhere within the stat abbreviation. And then they can also be adjusted to opponent stats. And if that's the case, you just get an OPP. But anyway, welcome to the big leagues. This is where basketball gets fun. Complicated, but still fun. Once you start to learn the advanced stats, that's when you start to feel like a true guru, and it's not just gibberish anymore. You understand what thinking basketball is talking about. So our first category of advanced stats, we'll look at efficiency. The player efficiency rating. This takes into account all the regular stats such as assists, points, rebounds, and the negative stats also, then uses a calculation to sum up your efficiency all into one number. Anyway, I'm sure you can already guess who the PER GOAT is. Nikola Jokic. And if you couldn't guess that, well, unfortunate. But it should tell you how good of a player Nikola Jokic actually is. Then we have the true shooting percentage. This takes into account all field goals taken and accounts for the difficulty of each shot. A layup is much easier to make compared to a free, giving you an accurate picture of a player's ability to actually score. But what if I told you Rudy Gobert has the best true shooting percentage of all time, sitting at 67%, with Steph Curry at 6th place with 63%. Moving on, we have the effective field goal percentage. Similar to true shooting, but it simply takes into account the field goal, which excludes free throws, taking 2-pointers and 3-pointers, but accounts for the additional value of a 3-pointer. Instead of its value being 1, a field goal's value for a 3-point is now 1.5. And then some simple efficiencies. We have the offensive efficiency, which is how many points will a team or player score over 100 possessions. Then you have defensive efficiency, how many will a team or player allow over 100 possessions. Then you have points per possession, which is an indicator of offensive efficiency, calculating the average points a team or player scores per possession. The higher, the better. And for all you bettors out there, we have floor percentage. This indicates the probability that a player or team will score on the court, adding more insight to the reliability and consistency of the player. So the next time you want to judge a player's efficiency, now you have a little glossary that you can look at, a little index that's going to allow you to speak that language. If you have learned anything, please subscribe because we've got more to learn. Next, we're going on to impact and usage metrics. Simply put, we have the usage rate. Now this finds out the percentage of plays run for the player whilst they are on the floor, indicating how much is created for that team through them. During Russell Westbrook's MVP season, his usage rate was at an all-time high of 41.7%. It's not been beaten still. And just a little hint for you to guess this mystery player with a stat named after them, their best season of usage rate doesn't even crack the top 50. Moving on, we have offensive rating and defensive rating. Now they share the same definition as offensive and defensive efficiency, points scored or points allowed over 100 possessions, but the calculations are just slightly different. The rating stats look at points and points off assists over total possession times 100, whilst efficiency simply looks at points over total possessions times 100. I like to use the rating stat when I'm looking at players because it takes into account the points of assist, but when I'm looking at a team, I might as well just stick to efficiency. And now you know that, you should know about net rating. Net rating is the difference between offensive and defensive rating, helping you understand the balance of a team's defense and offense. I don't know if you guys know this, but the Wolves, I believe, they actually had a negative net rating, and that just shows how poor their offense is and how great their defense is, and probably explains what's going on right now in the playoffs. Our next impact stat is win shares. This stat estimates the player's impact on winning using both offensive and defensive stats. Then we have the offensive win shares, which only looks at the player's contribution to winning on offense, and the defensive win shares, which does the exact same, but only for defense. I personally like to use defensive win shares when I'm looking at how good is a player at getting stops. Then you have your win shares per 48 minutes, which is probably the most important one because this uses the normal win share stat but helps compare players regardless of playing time, evaluating what a player's impact would look like over the 48 minutes. Now this next stat is probably the most glorified stat of all time, the box plus minus. This looks at the overall impact a player has on their team. You also have offensive box plus minus, which isolates the player's impact on the offensive end of the court. Then you have the defensive box plus minus, which isolates the defensive side of the ball. And analysts love the plus minus stat so much that here are 5 more variations of it. We have adjusted plus minus made by Wade Winston and Jeff Sagarin, which accommodates for a team's strength so that stats don't look inflated, for example, against the Pistons, and dumbed down against the Timberwolves. Then you have the regularized adjusted plus minus, which does the exact same thing as before, but it reduces the statistical invariance and is just more reliable. And then you have statistical plus minus, developed by Dan Rosenbaum, which combines the normal box score stats with advanced stats for a more well-rounded estimation. Then you have player impact plus minus, developed by Jacob Goldstein, which incorporates the on-court and the off-court data to find out a player's impact. And then my favorite, we have the augmented box plus minus, which has been developed by Ben Taylor, aka the thinking basketball guy. And this combines the on and off-court data with a team's quality and the opponent's quality to find out the best and most well-rounded impact. If I just taught you something and you want to learn more, please subscribe. Now, as we're getting to the end, here are a few stats that I think have some cool names. We have the value over replacement stat, also known as VORP. Now this measures an impact of a player's overall contribution compared to their replacement player, i.e. their sub. For example, it will take Luka Doncic's impact compared to Dante Exum's. Then I like wins above replacement player, which is WARP, but also focuses on the number of additional wins that a player provides. Then we have simple player rating, which is SPR. Just for some reason it reminds me of SPD Power Rangers. This simply combines all the traditional box score stats to produce a single number that represents a player's effectiveness. And then we have the individual player value, IPV, and this uses traditional stats and advanced stats to produce a single value to adjust for the context of teammates and opponents. Okay, bear with me, we are so close, and these next ones, they explain themselves and they simply are just percentages of a stat on the court. For example, to start with, we have the rebounding. You have rebounding percentage, offensive rebounding percentage, defensive rebounding percentage, and then for playmaking, you have the assist percentage, turnover percentage, and then you have the potential assist. You see, I like this one. It shows you how well a player can actually playmake. For example, Cade Cunningham. He was actually top 10 in this stat at some point during the season, but his team were full of bums, so it did not show up on the box score. All he needed was better shooters, and he would have probably been leading the league in assists. And then we have some defensive percentages, steal percentage, your block percentage, and then you get onto the free throws. Nice and simple, you have a free throw rate. This looks at the rate of free throw attempts to field goal attempts and looks at how often a player gets to the line. Then you have your simple measurement of pace, and this looks at the number of possessions a team gets in 48 minutes. And okay, the stat that you've all been waiting for, the stat that is named after a player and a team. The first one we have is the LeBron stat, the luck adjusted player estimate box prior regularized on off stat, which is simply just a luck adjusted, regularized adjusted, plus minus. It's a head honcho stat, and it's just a way to create a more accurate plus minus using as much data as possible. And I think it's just named after LeBron because he used to dominate the stat. And the team with a stat named after them is the Raptors. It combines a player's tracking data and on and off rating to evaluate a player's overall impact on their team performance, both offensively and defensively. And there we have it. Those are 70 plus stats in 13 minutes. But for now, guys, I am so happy that you watched this video. If you liked this video, drop a like.